model is, this model is a mathematical fantasy. I can't really carry out this random walk on a computer. It's not an algorithmic process. Why? Well, the reason is, let's say I flip a coin and get a random mutation. That's a program. So I have a program, and I give it as input my current organism. One thing that can go wrong is that the program that is a mutation never finishes, never gives me an output, never gives me a new organism. And I just sit there waiting forever. So, as a pure mathematician, I can just eliminate that by definition and say, if you pick a mutation at random and that mutation doesn't give you a new organism, we'll just skip that mutation. The mutation has failed. Okay? But in the real world, you can't do that. Another problem is, it may be that the mutation gives you a new organism, you get an output, it's another bit string, but when you run that bit string, it never finishes, it never calculates anything, it never stops. I mean, if it does calculate something, and stop, then you can just run the program, see if it's giving you a bigger positive integer than your current fitness, and then you can decide if it's going to be the new organism or not. But what happens if the mutated program never calculates anything? It just runs forever and never outputs a thing, and you just sit there waiting. So, but in the real world, if I wanted to do this on a computer, I would be in trouble. But as a pure mathematician, it's not a problem. I just say a mutation that gives you an organism that doesn't have a fitness because it doesn't calculate a positive integer will just be a failure. So we're going to try that mutation. It's going to take one time step. In this model, the concept of time in this model, I think the natural concept is 1 unit of time every time you try a mutation. And the mutation can fail and the mutation can succeed. See, so this model may sound a little artificial, but actually, if you want to run it on a computer, but what I want to do is prove theorems. And I'm trying to find the most straightforward formulation from a mathematical point of view in order to be able to have the hope of proving a theorem. A hope which in this case is satisfied. Okay, so now if you actually wanted to run this on a Turing machine, speaking as a theoretical computer scientist, you could actually run such a random walk if you had what's called an oracle, what Turing called an oracle for the halting problem. Turing talks about oracles in a 1939 paper that isn't as famous as his 1936 paper. The paper is called Systems of Logic Based on Ordinals, and I think it was a problem forced on him by his PhD thesis advisor at Princeton called Alonzo Church, and at least that's how I excuse Turing, because Turing, of course, is a much better mind, better mathematician and more creative than Alonzo Church. So the one good thing in this long paper, which was his PhD thesis, is the place where he talks about the idea of an oracle. So now, but I don't need an oracle, a general purpose oracle. I mean, if you have an oracle, it's very easy to solve the Busy-Bieber problem and find really concise names, the best possible names for ways to calculate very big positive integers. If you wanted to actually run this random walk on a computer, I'm not going to give you a general purpose oracle. You need an oracle for the halting problem, a way to decide if a program halts or not, to decide if a mutation halts or not, or if the mutated organism halts or not. But I'm only going to let you use the oracle for that purpose. Okay? So you are allowed an oracle, so to speak, in this process, but only in a very constrained way. Otherwise, the model is meaningless. Okay? Now there is an important concept in this model called mutation distance. I like to call it mutation distance between two organisms, which you can define in two ways. One way is as minus the log of the probability of going from organism A to organism B in a single mutation. It turns out this is equivalent to, this is a theorem from algorithmic information theory, in fact from a paper of mine in the Journal of the ACM in 1975. Turns out that this definition is equivalent to saying the size in bits of the smallest program M that takes A as input and produces B as output. And this has a name in algorithmic information theory. It's called the relative complexity of B given A. So this is an idea that goes back even to Shannon's Shannon version of information theory, where this would be H of B slash A. It's the relative entropy of the mutated organism relative to the original organism. So this turns out to be exactly that concept, not quite. In my 1975 Journal of Aviation paper, where the algorithmic information theory falls into place, the whole formalism, it turns out that to get the most beautiful properties, the way you want to define the relative program size complexity, the size and bits of the smallest program, not to get B if you're given A from free, but to get B if you're given a minimal size program for A for free. Then the formalism is beautiful, the theorem's fall in place. But here you're just given A, you're not given a minimum size program for A. But this theorem is still true. Okay, but it's a slightly different definition than the one you need to use in algorithmic information theory to get the same formal properties that you get in Shannon information theory. Okay, that's just a technical point for those of you who know this stuff. Okay, so this is the model. You have to tell me exactly what the programming language is, and I do. This is what a mutation is, this is what the probability of a mutation is. And one very important question is, my wife Virginia, looking at this, said, well, she said, if this field is really successful, then you should be able to go back to biology with this and find something. And this postulate of these very powerful algorithmic mutations, bothered me. I said, this is making my theory work mathematically, but it's distancing me from real biology. Well, Virginia said, one should go back to biology and see how powerful mutational mechanisms really are. Certainly this is more powerful than a localized point mutation. Well, just last night, no, the night before last, I'm reading a book in Spanish that I got through Amazon in Spain. It's called La Crisis Latente del Darwinismo, and it's written by a Brazilian philosopher, Mauricio Abdala, whom I'm told, the rumor is, was not able to publish this book in Portuguese in Brazil because it criticizes Darwin's theory of evolution. But this book was published, I'm happy to say, here in Spain. And for me, the most interesting thing in this book, well, there was a lot that I find interesting, is that he's talking about a biologist who unfortunately is not at this university, but was at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. And this biologist is called, is it Mauricio Sandin? No, Maximo Sandin. And I've heard that his website declares that he felt forced to ask for retirement. He has a marvelous website, and it's something like, we are somos bacteria y viruses. And what Abdallah points out, he looks at a lot of problems, he thinks, with neo-Darwinism, with the new synthesis. And he says, well, one thing is to point out that there are holes, but it's even better if you can propose an alternative theory, right? Because if the only theory you have has some problems, well, if it's the only theory you've got, you're probably going to stick with that theory, right? Until somebody proposes a better theory. Yes, you know that it has some problems, but, like this is like Feynman saying, well, really everything's got to be discrete, but I don't have a theory, so continuum has problems, but you've got to come up with a whole way of doing physics discretely. So anyway, but he says, yes, there is someone who has come up with a sort of a complete alternative to Darwin's theory, and that gentleman is Maximo Sandin, whom I tried to get in touch with. Didn't try too hard, but I'd like to get in touch with him if possible. And what does he propose? He is proposing that he says, well, point mutations are just not good enough to do much. Mostly they do nothing, or they're bad for the organism. So what does he think is driving? Where does he think the creativity in evolution is coming from? From viruses. There seems to be evidence suggesting, at least he claims it, and Abdallah seems to believe it, that our genome is full of, it's a mosaic of bacterial DNA and viral DNA, or stuff that probably was viral DNA but is not a complete virus anymore. But so the whole point is that Abdallah seems to think that vertical gene transfer is not the most important mechanism. He thinks it's horizontal gene transfer. And it's the viruses that are moving information around from organism to organism. In the animals. In bacteria, you don't need viruses because you have conjugation. You know, any two bacteria can meet on the street and say, I've got this nifty gene which will help us to survive longer if penicillin is, or some other antibiotic is around. But with animals like us, you know, it looks like it's only sexuality and to your children but the information is transmitted, which is called vertical gene transfer or information transfer. But horizontal gene transfer, according to Sandin, is actually the most important thing, and he claims that viruses can do it. They can insert themselves in the genome, they can reorganize the genome. The important point is they can lead to much bigger transformations of the genome than you would get with point mutations. So I don't know if this is true or not. I went and ordered every book by Máximo Sandin that I can get through Amazon.España.es, and I'm anxious to read more about this. But I didn't just find this by chance. Virginia and I were in Sao Paulo, and I gave a talk like this talk, and there was a biologist there who was very lively.